We are back, and today we are going to be critiquing one thing from every so-called GOAT in the UFC. Now, if you don't know my GOAT list, I did a top 10 a couple of weeks ago. I'm not going to be including every single person. I'm going to include about five or six people on this list. But we're going to be critiquing one thing because you hear everyone talking about how good the GOATs were and how many defenses they got, but there needs to be a couple lights shined on the bad things that they did. And I'm not just talking about John Jones because he's the most iconic one. And by the way, this isn't in any order. So for example, the person that's at the beginning of this video, I'm not saying they're the number one GOAT. Like I said, I've already done a top 10 on it. So we're just going to be critiquing one thing from every UFC GOAT or so-on called greatest of all time. Starting off with Khabib. The problem with Khabib is that he didn't stick around long enough. Khabib could have had such a better legacy than he did. And don't get me wrong, he had a great legacy. Destroyed McGregor, destroyed Gaethje, destroyed Poirier, notable wins over Michael Johnson, Al Quinta, but he didn't stick around long enough. Maybe it was to protect his record because he didn't, if you lost, then the hype is gone. Maybe it was because of his father's passing. Maybe he was just done with the sport and didn't have interest in it anymore. Maybe he felt like it was the perfect time to retire. I don't know what it was, but he didn't stick around long enough to become the GOAT. He could have potentially been one of the greatest of all time, the number one greatest of all time. I still think he's in the top 5 of the best of all time or greatest of all time. But he could have been even better if he stuck around longer. You're telling me that Khabib versus Michael Chandler, Khabib versus Oliveira or Dariush, if that was on his resume, he wouldn't be even higher than, he would be in the top 3. If he, cleared out, you look at people like Volkanovski, who, besides, Ilia Topuria, he's fully cleared out the lightweight division. And he's now attempting to move up. Khabib, first of all, didn't really clear out the lightweight division. He defended it 3 times, and he didn't move up or anything. 3 title defenses and being called one of the GOATs isn't impressive. So for Khabib, the number one thing I'm going to critique him on is that he didn't stick around enough and didn't defend enough. I'm not saying he has to move up to 170 and start trying to go for that belt. If only he stayed at lightweight a little bit longer. Imagine he got to a 33-0 record. That would have been insane, but he still had a good legacy, great legacy, undefeated, 29-0, dominated pretty much every fight besides Gleison Tibau. But he should have done a little bit more. Then we move on to a person, Anderson Silva. The problem with Anderson Silva, and I'm going to talk about losses a lot in this video, but Anderson Silva had so many losses. The statement greatest of all time is overused nowadays. People just call a fighter that's doing good or a fighter that had a good career the greatest of all time. The greatest of all time has to actually be the greatest of all time. Not just a period, not just a winning streak. They have to be the greatest of all time. And just like Anderson Silva, it's hard to call someone the greatest of all time when they've got 11 losses on their record. If you've lost to 11 people or you've lost 11 times, how can you be the greatest of all time? Now, I do understand that most of these losses, 8 of these losses, were all at the end of his career when he was kind of old and he was sticking around for no reason. I'm fully aware of that. But then he's not the greatest of all time, is he? I still put him at number 4. I'm just kind of going over my list now, but I'd still put him at number 4. But he won 1 out of his last 8. Winning 1 fight out of his last 8 isn't really impressive, and that was against Derek Brunson, I think, by decision. His last 2 fights, I believe he got finished as well. He had a really good legacy from 2013, 2006, but from there he just went on this massive winning streak. He's lost to people like Bisping, and his prime was just quite short. He just had quite a short prime. But yeah, he went on a huge losing streak and he can't really be the greatest of all time. He also took steroids, but I'm not going to talk about that because I said I'm only going to critique him for one thing. But he had so many losses. He's lost so many times. Like I said, you can't really call yourself the GOAT when you've lost 11 times and won one out of his last 8. But I respect that he's a very good fighter. I respect he had a dominant reign, but that end of his career wasn't the greatest part of it. Imagine John Jones went on an 8-fight losing streak now, or lost 1 out of his last 8. Imagine he just went on an 8-fight losing streak. He would not be the greatest of all time. Anyway, we're going to go on to John Jones. The problem with John Jones was his personal life, in my opinion. He had a perfect record, well obviously the steroids, but that's part of his personal life, but he had a perfect record, champion in 2 weight classes, 28-0 technically, I'm not counting the loss. Dominated most of his fights, very well known and respected. Most people would put him as the number one greatest of all time. But his personal life took a hit for his career, man. First of all, he took steroids, which is the number one reason why most people eliminate him from the GOATs list. They think GSP is the GOAT because Jones took steroids, which fair enough. But yeah, I reckon he would have been the GOAT, and I reckon he would have done what he did without steroids. Maybe he wouldn't have head kick KO'd DC, but he would have had a pretty good career without steroids. Obviously, he had the other issues that got him suspended, like the hit and run incident and the wife beating incident. But his personal life has kind of ruined his legacy. He was such a good fighter, and he still is. He's still fighting. He's got a fight booked at UFC 295, but he had such a long-lasting, good career. But his personal life just let him get in the way of it. It was like nobody could beat John Jones, so the only person that could beat him was himself. But yeah, I'm not saying he's not a good fighter. It's just his personal life, the steroid taking, every incident that he's had outside and got suspended for and got the belt taken away from him from, that's what ruined him. Because if none of those would have happened, he probably would have kept the belt for the longest time, more than any champion. I believe he still has, but he would have kept the belt from like 2009 to 2023, which I know he took a couple of years off, but that would be the longest reigning as a champion ever, and I think it still is, even though he's had so many suspensions. But still the greatest of all time. But obviously there's a lot of people that don't count him as the greatest of all time because of the incidents in his personal life, which fair enough, you can't argue with that. Then we're going to move on to someone, and it was quite hard to find any critiques for this person because they're that good. GSP, the only critique I can possibly think of is that, first of all, he has lost twice in his career. I know that's nothing compared to Anderson Silva's 11 losses, but he's lost twice to, I think it was Matt Serra and Matt Hughes, but he did beat after as well. And he arguably lost to Johnny Hendricks and BJ Penn. I know he defeated BJ Penn later on, but he did lose to Johnny Hendricks and BJ Penn arguably, which people are always going to shine about. And he never really had dominant fights towards the end of his career. A lot of them were decisions, and I know his last fight was a Bisping rear naked choke, but that's Bisping. Before the Bisping fight, GSP went on like an 8-fight winning streak of just decisions, which, I mean, a win's a win. Like, it's not as bad as Anderson Silva. A win is a win. But it just started to get a lot less dominant. There's a lot of questionable decisions in there. That's the only critique I can think of for GSP. Apart from that, champion in 2 weight classes, only 2, on paper, only 2 losses. He had a lot of finishes in his early career. Like I said, it was just towards the end of his career, he started being a little bit less dominant. A lot of arguable and questionable decision wins, sorry. But there's not much to critique GSP on, man. He hasn't achieved enough to become the number one GOAT like Jones has. He hasn't achieved enough because he has lost twice, but that's the one thing stopping him from being the GOAT, I guess. But yeah, it's just the dominant fight started to go down. A lot of decisions, split decisions, unanimous decisions, majority decisions, and a couple questionable decisions. But yeah, that's the only thing I can really critique GSP for. And then we move on to someone that again was pretty hard to critique, Demetrius Johnson. The thing that stops Demetrius Johnson from being a GOAT, I mean, I still think he's top 3, but that stops him from being a proper GOAT is that he never really won the bantamweight belt. I think he could have definitely done it because he was a stocky flyweight. He won the flyweight belt, dominated that division, cleared it out. Every other contender got wiped in that division. But if he'd have won the bantamweight belt, he would have solidified him as a GOAT. I mean, I know Anderson Silva didn't do it, and I know Khabib didn't do it, but to get in the GOAT list, you kind of have to. I don't know. If he'd have won the bantamweight belt, which he definitely could have, then he would have got in. He would have got in the top. He would have got top 2 in my opinion. He might have even overcome GSP. He could have been double champ. He just wasn't. No, he has lost a couple times as well. But again, I'm only critiquing him for one thing. But yeah, the only thing I'm going to critique him for is that he never won the bantamweight belt when he could have. He could have won the UFC bantamweight belt, and he's still winning today. But he could have won the belt. He could have been double champ. And if Demetrius Johnson was double champ, it would have been hard to not put him above GSP, and potentially talks about putting him above Jones, but he didn't. He should have tried more. Yeah, that's the only thing I can critique Demetrius Johnson about. But yeah, if you agree with any of these takes, please let me know, and please give me some ideas what to do. I'm not running out, but this is a fun little video critiquing GOATs, because GOATs don't really get, besides Jones, GOATs don't really get critiqued a lot, so it's nice to just poke at them. But yeah, that's my opinion.